Serious, parents or friends of missing children. What happened? When I was in kindergarten I used to take the school bus in the afternoon, half days, and one day I must have fallen asleep on the way home because I remember waking up at night in the back of the bus to a man different from my bus driver telling me everything would be alright. He turned out to be the bus manager coming in for work the next day and the bus driver hadn't checked if any kids were left. I must have been gone for 15 hours after school let out and I ended up at a skateland in a different city where the buses were kept overnight. It gave my mother a huge scare and she was convinced I was kidnapped. Luckily I wasn't, but after that I never took the bus. Something similar happened in my hometown. The bus drivers have to now walk through the bus to check for children and stick an OK sign on the back window. Not sure if this applies. A few days ago, on Christmas Day, I was driving home from a Christmas function when I spotted a very small, 2-year-old child running through a deserted parking lot. I immediately stopped and yelled at her just before she ran out into a busy highway. I don't remember the last time I was that scared. I ran up to her, looking for any sign of an adult anywhere. Also, we are in Iowa, where it was 30 degrees Fahrenheit. This little girl was barefoot and coatless, with a steady stream of snot coming out of her nose. I walked up to her and she raised her arms and said mommy. I stuck her in my car and called 911. I tried talking to her, but she could really only say a few words. She was never upset, and we just chilled for 30 minutes until police arrived. As the cop was taking my information, this kid's dad came walking out to the cop car and said, "Is that my freaking daughter?" I thought she was in her room watching a movie, and her mom was off crying about some stupid crap, so she didn't know where the frick she was. I don't know how she got out. My heart just sank. I wish I could have just kept her. Poor baby. A girl I taught at summer camp a few years back disappeared last year. She came home and just vanished. Her purse was found on a hiking trail like 30 minutes from her home. There's been no details released. It's even more sad because she has a baby. According to the local news, the baby is with her mom. For a second I thought you meant the girl took the baby with her and went missing. Nope, the baby is with its grandma. Got it. When I was in HS, there was a student who was extremely independent who would go on solo hiking, fishing, camping trips fairly regularly. One year he just never came back from the woods. There were search parties and the whole deal. Never found any sign of him. No one knows what happened, but it's assumed an animal got him or he drowned or something like that. Really sad. Great guy. One of my good friends had a little brother who up and disappeared one day. He was always a pretty good kid, and his brother was one of the smartest people I think I'll ever meet. Working for Exxon now and was the valedictorian of my school. Anyway, I helped my buddy put up missing posters all over town, and for 2 days the family was a wreck. Until, one day, someone saw him hanging out behind Best Buy eating pizza a couple days later. He ran away because he got a bad grade on a paper. He was 14. Everybody is fine now. The kid in question ended up going to the same college I did. Seems to be okay, but still a scary thought as to what it could have been. Jesus, that's a wacky overreaction. I was once upset at a grade I got in high school on a test, so I removed the staple and slowly ate the test. This kid needs to learn what performance art is. I used to hang out with a girl whose family moved to our small town from Ukraine and her brother went missing. What was sad was there were no search parties or anything, just flyers hung up with his picture. I'm assuming because he was 19. Anyway, the flyers stayed up for years, getting replaced when ruined. 6 years later, a lady walking her dog found a jawbone in the woods. It was his. What's crazy is I remember when he first went missing, everyone saying he probably went out in the woods, dug a hole, sat in it and got drunk, and fell asleep. He's fine, so maybe that's what happened. That's a stoic way of saying he committed suicide. A girl who used to sit beside me in music class went missing. I remember her mum coming into the class with pictures begging all of us for information on her daughter. It was heartbreaking to hear her, and despite the encounter happening 23 years ago, I remember it very clearly. Sadly, the girl's remains were found a few months later and it was determined she was murdered, and it remains an unsolved mystery. The other kid I didn't know, though I did know his sister, who was also in my music class. He was at a bush party not far from the center of town. He decided to take a shortcut home and was never seen again. It was a wooded area but not all that remote. The wooded area is between two towns with populations around 20k. Nothing was ever found and it is like he just walked off the face of the planet. There's something wrong with your music class, mate. There was a little girl that went missing in New Zealand ages ago, maybe in 2011 or 2012, dunno. Her mum turned away from her while she was playing to do some laundry, and when she turned back around she was gone. Divers found her a few months later in a sewer pipe. She must have fallen in a drain or something. Freaking horrible. In my very middle class, very safe, and sheltered little suburb, a 13-year-old girl went missing. She used to go to my school, and when she went missing everyone freaked out. Mass texts like if you see a girl with brown hair, description, her name is, name, please call, number, kept going around and everyone was talking about her. Everyone who ever might have crossed paths with her told their stories. It was believed she ran away from home, because she had done it before. Most times she came back within a day or two, but this time she had been gone 3 days. Another couple of days later, a family was walking through a park and they found her hanging from a tree. About 30 years ago, I was in first grade, eating lunch. This was back when the milk cartons had missing children pictures on them. I grabbed my milk carton, and on the side of it was a picture of my friend, who I was sitting right next to at the time. It turns out during summer break, his divorced parents got in an argument and his dad abducted him and tried to take him to Mexico. He was found and had returned in time to make it to the beginning of school, so none of us knew what happened until he showed up on everyone's milk carton. About 5-6 years ago my mom's friend and her dog traveled to China. Her daughter was 7, 8 IDK. They were in bazaar and just she passed one corner, her dog just disappears. For lucky, she is crazy lady who can do everything to find her dog She just starts scream, breaks everything and she hit one table to break it. Her dog was under that table. They were used rope on her dog's mouth to be quiet her. Police were there in time, too. They're both fine now. Yay. At least I am tried in English. This is an old family story, and you know how those can be. Sometimes things are passed along that turn out to be wildly inaccurate, but I believe it and the story has always seemed very haunting, tragic, and horrifying to me. A part of my family was in a wagon train going west when their 5-year-old daughter, Rebecca, wandered off. The wagon train stayed around an extra couple of days, but winter was coming and they didn't want to be stuck, like, for example, the Donner Party, so they kept going. Her parents and siblings stayed behind a few days longer, but every day meant they were further and further from the group, and eventually they had to give up on Rebecca and go catch up to the wagon train without her. I always hoped she was found and raised by Native Americans, but the reality is that she probably died in the woods, either from an animal, drowning, or exposure. I would believe it. I used to work with a lady who grew up on a reservation and she told me they had lots of stories about these things from those times. Both natives and other children wandering off and losing their lives from the elements. She said it was an area that was very woodsy quarry-like. This didn't happen to a child, but rather, my father went missing. My parents were divorced and so I saw my father just whenever, usually about every other weekend. He was a pretty crappy dad and an alcoholic, and ended up with a lady that brought out the worst of the worst in him. When I got older, phone calls from him were about once a month, and a couple of months had passed by and I hadn't heard from him. I saw said lady in a supermarket. She was following me, and I went right up to her after I noticed she was following me and I asked her if she had seen my dad. She told me that she saw him a couple of nights ago. I called and I called and I called his phone when I got home, but no answer. I even called his work. They said that he quit and couldn't tell me why. My dad had this job for over 20 years, so it wasn't really normal for me to hear this. We put in a missing persons report and he was declared missing. It was the worst feeling in the world because you have no means of reaching the person you're looking for. It's one of the most helpless feelings ever and I can't even imagine how it would feel if it had been a child rather than a parent missing. It ended up that my parked his car in a storage unit, shut it, and killed himself. His body was hidden there for 63 days before the police finally found him. It was the worst experience of my life, probably. I don't wish it on anyone. In June this year my stepdad took off missing and his body was found a few days later. I can't imagine how you coped in those 63 days. I still expect him to walk back into my house any day now. It just hasn't sunk in. Not sure it ever will. Hope you're coping okay. When I was in junior high, a guy I was friends with disappeared. They finally found his body like 15 years later. He's had a fricked up life and had gone and killed himself at the quarry near his house. This is a bit late and will just end up at the bottom, but I will add it anyway. When I was in elementary school, not sure which grade, second maybe, we were all sitting in class when a man ran into the classroom, grabbed a girl, and ran back out. He ran all the way from the door to the other side of the classroom, so it wasn't a random girl he grabbed. The teacher chased him out, and we didn't see her again for the rest of the class time. We also had a different teacher the next day. I remember we had 3 different teachers that year, but I never found out anything about the man and the little girl. I never knew exactly what happened. This was in Savannah, GA, back around 1980. I used to work at a big supermarket and one of my colleagues just disappeared only a few weeks after returning from maternity leave. She left her house one Sunday evening, no coat, purse or shoes. She was missing for a few weeks. The police interviewed everyone that worked with her. She was eventually found 4 miles from her house by a workman. She had postnatal depression and had jumped off a motorway bridge in an attempt to commit suicide. She survived the fall but was injured and unable to walk. She wasn't found in time. She died under the bridge, shielded from the road as she'd landed in a gated work compound. The local papers that had covered the story, with the blessing of the family, then ran a campaign to highlight the issue of postnatal depression. My sister's best friend John walked out the front door of his home in Northern California and was not seen for 10-15 years. Turns out, he decided to go for a really long walk. He made it to Argentina, then turned around and walked back. Somehow, since he didn't have any money or anything, he's now married with a kid. A girl I had been friends with for a few years didn't come to school one day in middle school. It was really weird for her to not be in school. She pretty much never missed a day. She loved school and was really good at it. She was supposed to meet my other friend at a bus stop that morning. It was about a quarter-mile walk from her house to that bus stop. Just never showed up. Our school did a thing where if you didn't show up for school, they would call your parents and tell them you weren't there. As I said, she would never miss a day of school, would never cut class, so her parents immediately knew something was up and went to the police. It's my understanding that the police started to look for her immediately, but they did not have to look much because she showed up at home that afternoon, naked from the waist down. She had been kidnapped on her way to the bus stop. He took her to an abandoned house, made her drink something and then she passed out. She woke up and he was gone. Door locked but was able to open the window. She made a rope by tying sheets together and scaled the side of the house and walked home. The school made an announcement at the end of the day not naming anyone, warning us to be on the lookout for any suspicious people and to be careful because of what happened. My friend group knew immediately it was her. The police got him. He was apparently a friend of the family. There were child pornography charges tacked onto his other charges. I guess they found some of that, but I don't know much because I was 11 when this happened. She missed like 3 days of school total and went to counseling through the rest of middle and high school. Ended up graduating at the top of the class and went to a prestigious school. My grandma went missing back in 1977. They found her car at a park where she liked to walk, but she was nowhere to be found. There's nothing more they found out about it. She's just gone. My stepfather's brother was kidnapped as a child. Basically, both of them were raised in a religious home for kids who were either troubled and were one step away from juvie or whose parents just couldn't take care of them but didn't want to put them in the foster system. My stepfather and his siblings were sent there by their parents because the older kids were pretty much juvenile delinquents and getting into all sorts of illegal crap and the younger ones were being neglected, and CPS and the police basically told them that they could either put all of them in this home or they'd be taken away and put into juvenile detention in the foster system. So one day my stepfather's brother, who was 6 at the time, is out in front of the home playing with the other kids. They get called in, a head count is done, and they notice that he's not there. They look for him. He doesn't turn up, and they call the police. From what my stepdad has told me, They barely did any investigation at all, and his parents didn't really care enough to push for more to be done. It was a mystery what happened until years later this couple comes to the home and confesses to the house mother that they kidnapped the child because they couldn't have children of their own and couldn't afford to adopt. They'd raised him as their own, but as he'd gotten older he started asking questions about where he came from. He'd know that he was legally adopted, and they fessed up to him about what they did. There were no legal ramifications for the kidnapping at all. The parents weren't arrested or anything, mainly because they were good parents and no one really wanted to put forth the effort to do anything about the fact that they kidnapped the kid, and the house mother helped them get in touch with my stepfather and his other siblings so they could reconnect. The siblings are all close now and still in touch, but none of them really had any kind of relationship with their birth parents at all after being sent to the home or later on in life. Grew up in Sarasota, FL in the 90s, early 2000s. Best friend calls me one day, wants to hang out. Plans fell through with his friend. Later that night, my cousin gets in trouble for sneaking out late at night. She got caught because she was chain smoking at 12 years old on camera behind a car wash my uncle managed. Cousin gets grounded. 2 days later Carly, Brucia goes missing. My friend Matthew calls me in hysterics. She went missing the night we hung out, was seen on tape walking through the car wash my uncle managed, right past where my cousin had been smoking. Same time of night, 1 day difference. From what I remember, they found her body behind a church a ways away. I don't know if they found the person who did it. I checked out emotionally when they found her. I heard she had a good home life. My friends that knew her loved her parents, loved being at their house. I still wonder why she went through that car wash. Her family lived on a fairly major road at the time. I hated passing by their house, months after the fact, and seeing people putting balloons and stuffed animals and pictures and flower displays and all manner of bulls on their lawn. Their daughter had been found and no one would let them move on. It was more than 6 months before people slowed down, and I was a freshman high school the first time I remember it being empty. Sarasota isn't a small town. Carly knew people in at least 3 different middle schools. She was mourned by a lot of people for a long time. Years ago, little girls started to go missing in our country. Most of them were around the capital city, but one of them was next door to a relative of mine, many hundreds of miles further away. She had phoned my relative, let's call her Nancy, and asked if she wanted to walk to the shops. Nancy said she didn't feel like it, so this little girl went by herself. She was never seen again. Police eventually discovered who was taking the children, but during a car chase he killed his female partner who had been helping him, and then killed himself. They found evidence, like personal wear, in his house, that the children had been there, but no one ever saw the little girls again, or knew what he had done with them. Most of them were blonde and around 11 years old. I think that the ultimate selfishness of killing himself before the parents could know what he did with their children should save a special place in heck for this monster. When I was 11 or 12, I was really good friends with a new girl at school who had Asperger's. She lived with her sister, mom, and dad in a condo, and I often went over and hung out. Her mom always seemed very odd to me. Something struck me very often strange about her, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I believe she suffered from severe mental illness like bipolar or schizophrenia unmedicated. One day, my friend didn't come to school, and she just never came back. A police officer came to our class and I vaguely remembering them questioning me and if anything seemed off about the situation. It turns out one morning that my friend, her mom, and her sister hopped in the van and drove to another province. Her mom wanted to separate from her dad and just kidnapped the daughters and left. It was heartbreaking not knowing where my friend was, and as she had more than mild Asperger's, it felt like her mom was taking advantage of her. The next school year, my friend showed up on the first day with her dad. Her dad was able to track them down by summer and bring them back home. It was a big relief for our group of friends. Her dad is an extremely caring and kind man who takes amazing care of her. I still see her from time to time and she and her sister are doing very well. She is attending makeup art classes at community college. Her sister is in med school and just bought a house with her fiance. I can't imagine the deep pain and frustration her father felt when the 3 of them disappeared. From time to time she would tell me updates about her mom, how she was now homeless living in a van and would call her once in a while to say a bunch of nonsense. Very sad and strange. In my city back in '91, this kid Michael He went missing from a ball game him and his parents were at. His mom was playing in it and his dad was watching. This kid literally disappeared just meters from his parents in broad daylight from the park, and no one saw a thing. I remember it was and still is kind of a huge story. It was one of Canada's biggest manhunts. They've identified a couple guys over the years matching his description and done DNA testing to determine if they're Michael, but no luck. The kid vanished. I'm from Venezuela and abductions are nothing out of the ordinary. A family that my family is pretty close with. They are pretty well off, which makes them a target for abductions. Their son got abducted for 2 years. The kidnappers went back and forth with prices. They started off asking something ridiculous like $50 million. Ended up settling for like $5 million. It took around 2 years to get him back and he doesn't like talking about it much, but he says that they fed him every day only eggs. And there were other people at the house he was being held. He assumed it was just other people that got abducted. They ended up dropping him off like 3 miles from a gas station in the middle of bumfuck nowhere. He's fine now, and they, as well as my family, moved to the States. At 2 AM on Thanksgiving night, my friend's boyfriend got very drunk and into a huge argument with his family. He then proceeded to crash his truck and jump off a dock into a nearby river. He took all his clothes off and emptied his pockets before he jumped. It has been 1 month and no one has heard from him, and no body had been found. Patrick, if you are reading this, we need you back. Dang, this one hit me hard. I'm really sorry that this happened. I hope he turns up okay. That's so sad to have lost someone close to you on a day that is about being with those very people. You guys are in my thoughts. PM if you need to talk. Just after my freshman year of college, a buddy of mine went missing from his house in New England. We later found out that he had run away, taken a flight to San Francisco and become one of the many people who jump from the Golden Gate Bridge each year. By the time we knew he was missing, he was likely already dead. I had visited the city before and have since, and my perception of that landmark will never be the same. He would be about 22 now. Miss you, bud. When I was 12, my next door neighbor disappeared. He was a couple of years younger than me, but we still played sports together and whatnot. I remember walking out to wait on the school bus one morning at about 6:30 and his dad was just sitting in a lawn chair in the street. The boy had gone to play somewhere the day before and never came home. His dad was just waiting for him to walk up. Apparently, he never came home. Police found his body in a soybean field about a half mile from his house. A 15-year-old boy shot him in the head and left him there. I've never seen such a devastated man as that father. When I moved to a small town in high school, a 16-year-old kid, Jay, went missing abruptly. Posters were all over the county for years. His parents swore that he had nothing to do with any kind of illegal activity and must have been kidnapped, or that he had run away to live in the city. Teenagers gossip a lot, and in a small town, lots of kids had theories. Many said they knew the real story of what happened to Jay. Over the course of 10 years, I heard the story quite a bit. It generally was that Jay had burned another teenager during a drug deal, and the other kid got revenge by luring him out to the woods and murdering him. The name of that teenager was brought up, but I always dismissed the whole thing as rumors and gossip and people trying to act like they knew more than they really did for posterity. 12 years after his disappearance, they found his remains in the woods. It turned out the story's rumors that I had heard for years from various other teenagers were accurate. A teenage kid whose name was mentioned in all the rumors eventually confessed, drug deal gone bad, was ripped off, wanted to pretend to be like a real gangster, and under the guise of hanging out brought Jay to a quarry in the woods and murdered him, disposed of the body under the rocks. He's in prison now. I still don't believe small town rumors, but it was mind-blowing how I had gone through most of my young life knowing exactly who killed this kid, how and where, but had dismissed that information as being bulls. I assume the family dismissed it as bulls as well. I hope that if another situation like this arises, I'll take small town rumors a bit more seriously. Oddly, I am currently living in a house that is directly across the street from Jay's family's home. All the posters from the telephone poles have been taken down. It must be devastating for them, because they really didn't want to believe that their son had any connection with drug dealers or illegal activity. I got a call from my boss, Skiskel, to come down with my group over the radio as the weather was going to get bad soon and fast. I was halfway up the mountain and informed to nearby instructors to do the same. They are junior to me and didn't carry radios. Slowly skiing down, really slowly as the wind limited visibility to 3 meters or so. 30 minutes earlier we had blue skies. As I arrive at the base, I drop my group at a local bar restaurant so they can drink. I'm moving on to try and catch a last lift up, and I get the call over the radio from my boss to come to the office right now. We, instructors, gather. A colleague is shivering in the back office, red eyes from crying. Turns out, in that short storm, halfway up the mountain, one of her students, a 6-7-year-old girl, disappeared. We searched all night. I saw the parents with my boss briefly, complete and utter shock with waves of furious anger. Luckily, the local voluntary search and rescue squad, of which we're part of, are all incredibly fit, strong, qualified and capable. Nobody did less than multiple kilometers through hip-deep snow throughout the night, downwind mostly, no moon. In the morning a farmer from the next village drove in with a kid, full of hot chocolate, on his tractor. Our colleague needed psychological help for weeks and never returned to the job. My boss was amazing throughout though, he really was. The kid was fine and was able to walk that incredible distance due to the low body weight and the fact that, at that age, they can't undo their bindings. So the skis stayed on. It's been some time so I don't remember all details. Also my verbal expression is not the best so please bear that in mind. A couple years ago around Christmas time my neighbor's 8-year-old son went missing. It was the last day of school that year and he had left school alone. Although a friend saw him earlier that day, I think, but after that he just vanished to thin air. Later that night the parents were of course extremely worried and my parents along with other volunteers and police force helped them to try find their son. But nothing was found. Not until a few days later, the day before Christmas Eve, when someone was digging stuff with an excavator by a road near their home and found a kid in the snow. He had been playing in a snow castle, which had collapsed on him and he died for lack of oxygen. I didn't see the parents too often after that, and we no longer live there, but those events must haunt them every Christmas. I couldn't imagine something like that happen to my own child. Your verbal expression is excellent in this point. Don't be so hard on yourself. Not a missing child story, but my sister had almost been abducted when we were younger. It was my 6th birthday party in the middle of August. We lived at the very end of a cul-de-sac with a huge garden in the middle of the lanes. All the neighborhood kids were out and we always played hide and go seek in this garden. My sister was 4 at the time and she was hiding behind a bush about 5 feet away from me when a dark purple cargo van drove up. This guy who looked to be about mid-40s swung the driver's door open and went to grab her. Now, my dad's a cop. My grandfather's a cop. I have 3 uncles who are cops. We grew up hearing the horror stories and knowing about stranger danger. I knew something was wrong right away and little 6-year-old me ran up, screaming and started beating on him as hard as I could. I bit his forearm and he let go and sped off. What sickens me the most is the amount of balls this guy had. It's not like we weren't unsupervised. It was my birthday party. There was kids everywhere including all of our parents sitting out in the front lawn, watching us with their feet in the kiddie pool. I didn't really realize how serious the situation was until I saw my dad and his buddy, who rented our basement suite off of us and was also a police officer, running down the street with their badges in one hand and their guns in the other, trying to track down this van. The moms were all freaking out and my sister and I were just way too calm about it. I kept saying, "It's okay mom, I handled it," and my sister just shrugged like, "Yeah mom, calm down." But now that I'm 24 and see my young nieces playing outside, I get so paranoid. They found the van parked in the backyard of this guy's house about 4 blocks down. After searching his house, they found tons of child pornography as well as homemade bombs. Kinda freaky. 2 people. The first was a girl named Kelsey. I didn't really know her well, but I saw her in a local musical and she was a friend of a friend. She was kidnapped Blitz style in a Target parking lot. She was only missing for a day or 2 at most before her body was found at a lake. I remember it being way too close for comfort because she was kidnapped near where I took dance classes and her body was dumped near where I live. Her murderer was arrested a day after her body was found. From what I remember, he didn't know her at all. Just thought she was an easy mark. Freaking sad. The second was a friend's father. He went for a hike to decompress from the stress of Thanksgiving last year. Hours later he didn't come back. They found his wallet and his keys in his car, but found nothing on the trail. They searched the woods for him for a good week, but couldn't find anything because of how dense the foliage was. Then the next day, he stumbled on the trail and was found by some joggers. He refuses to say anything about what happened, but he seems like he's doing okay. I think he went off to starve himself to death in the woods, but ended up having a change of heart. Who really knows except for him though? There is a story that circulates in my family that my oldest sister was kidnapped as a baby. My dad and her mother were divorced and my dad got custody of her. Full custody. Out of the goodness of his heart, after hearing his ex-wife's impassioned plea to get closer to her daughter, he agreed to a visit with him there. The story goes that my dad went to use the bathroom and when he got out, his ex-wife and my sister were gone. He heard the car start in the driveway and ran out just in time to see her speeding off, my sister in the back seat. Police were called, but for a short while, my dad feared the worst, until someone from a hotel downtown called the police because they found an abandoned baby in the hotel room. It was my sister, and her mother was never seen again. One of my son's friends disappeared in the Utah wilderness years ago while on a camping trip with Boy Scouts and was never seen again. He had been at the lake swimming and fishing with some of the boys before telling his dad he was going to walk the short distance through some trees back to camp on the trail. His dad left the lake and was walking the trail back to the camp a few minutes later when he heard his son's voice calling for him from the opposite side of the lake behind him, nowhere in the direction of the camp. So his dad ran the rest of the way to the camp, confirmed he wasn't there and neither the other scouts or counselors had seen him, and immediately reversed back to the lake where he heard his son yelling. Despite search parties making annual treks to look for him every year since, he's never been found. Reddit makes me never want to camp or let my children out of my sight. Kid in question is my grandfather's friend's teenage daughter. She was spoiled as a child because her father really doted on her, given as much money as she wanted as a teen to spend on whatever she wanted. She got a boyfriend, and I suppose she was pretty in love with him because she got some expensive stuff for him. Jewelry, a wallet, I don't remember, but it cost a lot. A while later, she went missing. They found her body chopped up and her fingertips sliced off to prevent identification. Turns out her boyfriend ganged up with a bunch of thugs to take her money and kill her. This was a rural place in Sarawak, Malaysia, so justice never really was served. Blake, a former classmate of mine, disappeared about 3 years ago. He was 20 years old. In school, he and his twin brother were always jokesters, but both of them were so nice to everyone. They were on a cruise ship around Alaska with their family when the family reported him missing. They last saw him around midnight one night. He might have gone to explore the rest of the ship or go back to his room. The ship made one of those scheduled stops, but records show that he did not leave the ship and go ashore. His family just never saw him again. The ship was searched. Coast Guard was brought in to search the waters, and I don't think anyone or anything was found. No security footage, no man overboard alarms. Our hometown is small. He and his family made good impressions on a lot of people, so all of us were very upset when we heard the news. The worst is not knowing what happened to him. A high school friend of mine went missing in our sophomore year of college. He was 20 years old and attending the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater. Always an upbeat guy, super happy. He was walking home from a house party at like 1 in the morning. The cell signal puts him within an 8-block radius of his house at 1:45 a.m. They found him naked and dead in the quarry the next day. His back was over 0.1 and they ruled the death accidental, but there are parts that make it seem like he was murdered. There is also a history of students going missing in that area and showing up dead. Sad story. R.I.P. Mark. When I was 14, my classmate disappeared for 3 days. The majority of my grade was away in another province for a school trip and we were not told of his disappearance so it wouldn't ruin the trip. We were informed when they found his body though. Apparently he was playing with a friend and they made a raft and paddled out to the middle of a lake. His friend fell off and couldn't swim. He tried to rescue him and they both drowned. It was quite shocking and incredibly sad. R.I.P. Eric. My father went missing when I was in high school. He just didn't come home one night. Weds. I remember my mom asking me if I'd seen him and then checking the garage the next morning for his car. It wasn't there. I went to school the next day and ended up calling my mom during lunch period to see if he had come home. She said he hadn't and she had called the police the night before. Since he hadn't been gone for 24 hours, they didn't take her seriously. She started looking around the house and noticed all of his things were there. Toothbrush, bag, clothes. She then remembered that he had mentioned that he may go visit one of his friends, but couldn't get in touch with the friend. Another day goes by and my mom starts to flip the frick out. It's Friday now. I remember her pacing around and asking me where he was and if I thought he had left her for another woman. It took everything in me to calm her down and comfort her and tell her that everything was going to be fine. Late Friday night she files a missing persons report. Saturday morning we get a phone call that they found my dad's car in the parking lot of the police station. The station she called the night he went missing. The car had been sitting in the lot since Wednesday, and specifically, in the receptionist's parking spot, but still no sign of him. Our family friend decides to go walk around where they found his car. Less than 100 yards from the car and the police station, he found my dad. My dad had shot himself in a park next to the station. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video.